So now that you guys know why the IDs are actually important for us, let's try and actually see this in code. And I put in two different IDs right here, one in the URL, or in the path, and then actually four down here for the actual ID for the JSON object, just to kind of show you guys how these are coming into the code, because they're actually added in two different places. So let's try and do a send here, and I put a breakpoint in my code in the put request, and notice, because this is actually set up as the API, which is the default path for my API, the name of the controller, which is customer in our case, and then the put request actually added an ID in the end. Now the reason this guy is available for me is because of this guy right here, because I put in a curly bracket and explained to the system everything after the controller name. If you put in a slash and something, a front slash and something, it'll be mapped into the ID. Of course, only this part, the first part after the front slash. Not if I put in more like this, but the first one after the front slash, right? So this guy is going to be mapped now into a variable called ID, which is automatically then put inside this parameter right here. So if I mouse over this guy, you'll notice it says 1. And notice that's also what I put in the URL for the actual path right now inside Postman. So let me try and show you that, just to make absolutely sure that you get what I'm doing here. Inside Postman, notice I put 1 in the path right here. And again, that's then being mapped all the way to this property right here. So that's how the 1 got in here. But what about the other one, the other ID? Well, that's actually mapped inside the customer business object right here. Notice that says 4 in the ID. If I mouse over this guy again, you'll see this guy says 4 in the ID, right? So where does the 4 come from? Well, that's the JSON body. So if I go back to Postman, that's where the 4 is coming from. So now I have both IDs inside my system. Now I just want to validate that they are actually the same. And if they're not, I'm just going to throw an exception this lesson. The next lesson will work with actually giving status codes back to the user of our REST API. So in here, I'm going to do just a simple if statement. We have the ID, which is this guy coming from the URL or the path. We're going to say if that doesn't equal to the customer's ID that's coming from the body, or in our case, the JSON object. If these don't match, let's just throw a new invalid operation exception, where we're going to say something like, now this is a pretty long explanation, and this is of course not something I would expect a customer to understand, but it doesn't matter because I'm expecting it's developers who are using our actual REST API here, so that would probably make sense for them. Let's try and run this now and just have a look at what will actually happen now when I send that request. So the system is running and I'm doing a send now, and notice I'm getting in and actually throwing this exception because these guys don't match. We have a 4 and we have a 1. They don't match. Kaboomy, we have an exception. This is just not valuable for whoever's using my REST API, because they're still just getting a status code of 400, or they're getting actually a bad request back. Let's just try and continue and see what actually happens here. Because notice I'm actually getting something like this back, internal server error. That's like, oh my God, if I'm using a system and this is what I get back, I'm like, I'm never going to use that system again. Something is horribly wrong if they send back internal server error to me and they start putting in stuff like this. That's just really bad. So instead, what we're going to do next lesson is we're going to send some real requests back that explain a response, explain with a status code what actually went wrong. See you in the next lesson.